when you're pitching, it needs to be strategic and it needs to be highly targeted. So we're thinking about the language that the ideal client is going to resonate with, like using those words so that they understand like you're on the same page, like you're speaking the same language. You need to make your pitches very short and sweet. I see a lot of people being quite defensive and just going into great detail about all the experience they have, or like, you know, trying to convince the person that they should be hired, which is never going to work. The only exception to that in terms of having a longer pitch is if you are pitching to a smaller company directly who has probably never hired a writer before. And, you know, for example, like a supplement company, although they're probably, if they were a newer one or a smaller one, or some kind of startup who's working with, you know, like a patient advocacy group or something like that, they might not have hired a writer before. They might have had people internally doing the marketing and stuff. So in those cases, you do need to make it a lot more personalized, and it's going to be a bit longer because you need to sort of do an analysis of what they're currently doing and then position yourself as a solution to the problems that they're facing, or as a way for them to achieve what they want. But in most cases, if you're pitching to a medcoms agency or a publication or somebody or an entity who's probably worked with writers before, you're just very, very short and sweet because no one has time to read any more than that. And also it's more authoritative. You got to get your value proposition out there in a friendly yet professional way. So I see a lot of pitches that are overly professional and overly formal, and it just literally looks like a template that they have pasted in to the email or the message. And it doesn't even feel like it's coming from a real person. It feels like it's coming from a robot, or like it's all been automated and you don't want to respond. The person is not going to want to respond. But if there's a friendly or a personalized, like a conversational aspect to it, then that really helps because you feel like you're talking to a real person. So for example, using I'm, like I''am instead of I am, is actually how you would say it. So I'm a big fan of those kinds of phrasings where you're speaking like you would to a person instead of a robot speaking to a person. Generic pitches almost never work. So you do want to take your time, even though they're very short and sweet. Make sure that the pitch actually makes sense for the person that's going to be reading it or the company that you want to work with. Create an array of pitching templates to save time. So one of the things that we do with our coaching students at Prospology is we encourage them to imagine every possible scenario that could come up in an email exchange and figure out how they would handle it. So they don't just have one template where they like pitch, one time and then that's it. They actually have a lot of different versions of a template in terms of how they would respond to different things. Because if you do all that preparation in advance, it removes a lot of the stress and anxiety out of it. And you feel prepared and you feel like you can handle anything that comes at you. And that fear could just be stopping you from sending out the pitches in the first place. And so one thing that helps, aside from like having a community of people who are supporting you and helping you do all of this, which is what we do, you can have your templates that you can refer to and you can lean on those. You want to have at least one expert in the field actually look at your templates and review them, because again, like if they're willing to provide you with honest feedback, constructive feedback, you have to make sure it's somebody who's actually going to do that, because people will just say, oh yeah, it looks good, whatever. They don't actually care. They're not if there's no constructive criticism, it means they don't really care about whether you succeed or not. They're more concerned with preserving your you feeling good about yourself. But that's not actually going to help you. So if there is somebody who's willing to look at your templates and say, well, actually, if I received that, I would ignore it. Or, this part seems like a red flag to me, or I don't understand what you mean by this. It's too jargony, or, that kind of feedback is very, very critical. So again, like if you're looking for that kind of thing, that's what we do at Prospology as part of like, you know, our entire program. Pitches from newbies tend to be overly needy. So again, I've reviewed a lot of pitches from people who are just launching their freelance medical writing business. And there's often this undertone of desperation that comes out very naturally because they haven't done it before and they really want to get clients. And so that is very easily picked up on from the prospect. So if you've ever spoken to a salesperson, or, you know, like when you walk into a store, I really, really hate this. Maybe you can resonate with it too. Like you walk into a store, it's pretty small. There's just this one representative there, and you start looking at things. And as soon as you look at something, they're like, oh, this came from like, you know, Costa Rica. And like, you know, we saved these children and then they stitched these things. And like, and you're just like, okay, but I didn't ask you about that. Like, you know, can you just let me look? And so there's kind of this like, please will you buy my stuff? Like, please will you buy my stuff? And it just turns you off straight away. And you're like, I would rather just leave and not have to interact with you. And so that's, I wouldn't say it's an extreme example because that does happen all the time. It comes when people are not confident in what they are selling. And so the prospects will be able to tell if you're not confident in what you are selling. And again, this is where coaching comes into play, because you need to be confident before you actually start to pitch. But if you're not, you can at least pretend that you are by having somebody review your templates and make sure that you don't have an undertone of desperation in your pitches. And actually, now that we have AI, it would be really interesting to kind of run the different templates through AI and to ask it, like, is there a sense of desperation here, or am I coming across as an authority figure? And then get it to suggest some revisions or some alternatives. I think it's a great resource. You have to remember that you don't need them, they need you. You're actually on the same level as them. Like, you know, they need something, you have something to offer. There is no hierarchy here. If anything, you should be slightly above them in the hierarchy, because, you know, you only have a limited amount of time. You can't work with every single client. You're sort of critiquing them and deciding if they are a good fit for you. And I've definitely flipped the switch when it comes to, I mean, I don't pitch to companies now because I'm not really doing any medical writing myself, but if I was, it would be a very different energy to what I was in, you know, in the early stages. It would be like, well, I have very limited time and, you know, maybe I could do this or that. I can fit you in next Tuesday at 2 p.m. kind of thing. Like, the more of that energy that you bring to your pitching, the more successful you will be, because it shows that you don't need them, they need you, and maybe you're willing to accommodate them. It's a very different energy. And so, you know, on the opposite end of the scale, if you find yourself being defensive, you're not going to be successful with your pitching. Or you're going to be successful, but it's going to be people who don't have the budget to pay you appropriately, or they're not going to treat you so well, or it's going to be kind of an uphill battle to work with them. Because that's the experience that I've had. Successful pitching requires an ongoing, sustained effort. So not just, you know, we were talking about kind of having different responses to an email exchange, but what if you're not getting any responses? This is one of the most underutilized areas of pitching, and one of the things that can lead to freelance medical writers not having a good cash flow or you know, stable revenue. They send out hundreds of pitches and then they just wait. And they sort of hold their breath, and they're like, well, hopefully some people will come back to me. And, you know, maybe in a few weeks they will send another batch of pitches. But again, they're just kind of sitting, waiting around. But that is only the beginning. Like, the first time that you attempt to contact somebody is just the beginning. Sometimes you have to, you know, follow up many times before you actually get a response, either because, you know, the person is busy, or they didn't look at it, got lost in their inbox, they had more important things to do, they weren't looking for a writer at that time. There's so many reasons why that first attempt would not actually land with them. It also could have been the way that you worded it didn't resonate with them, so you need to try wording it slightly differently. Maybe it wasn't friendly enough. Maybe it just seemed like it was coming from a robot, or, it didn't seem like it was directed at them, or something that you said was kind of, it just wasn't aligned with the needs of that person, so they didn't respond. But then the follow-up does actually resonate because the timing is right and it resonates and all these things. So you need to have a follow-up schedule, and you need to stick to it rigidly.